When a waitress humiliates an elderly black man in a bustling cafe, she has no idea the quiet woman watching from across the room is the CEO of the entire chain, and his daughter. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the upscale cafe as sunlight streamed through its tall windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden tables and cushioned chairs. The morning crowd bustled with energy, professionals typing furiously on laptops, friends sharing light-hearted conversations, and baristas shouting out orders in the background. The atmosphere was lively, yet exclusive, a signature feature of this popular high-end establishment. Clarence Johnson stepped inside, his presence a quiet contrast to the buzzing scene. In his mid-70s, Clarence carried himself with an air of dignity that belied his modest attire. His navy blue sweater and khaki slacks were neatly pressed, though they lacked the ostentatious branding often seen on the cafe's patrons. In one hand, he held a well-worn leather briefcase, and in the other, a folded newspaper. He paused for a moment, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the room for an empty seat. Bethany, one of the cafe's waitresses, noticed him almost immediately. Young, sharp-featured, and dressed in the cafe's sleek uniform, she prided herself on maintaining the establishment's air of exclusivity. To her, Clarence was an anomaly, a man who, by her judgment, didn't belong in such an upscale space. Her lips curled into a faint sneer as she adjusted the menu she was holding and approached him with exaggerated precision. "Can I help you, sir?" Bethany asked, her tone laced with thinly veiled condescension. Clarence offered her a warm smile, unbothered by her demeanor. "Yes, please. A medium black coffee and a croissant," he said, pulling out his wallet. Bethany hesitated, her eyes flicking over him. "Are you sure?" she said, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of nearby patrons. "You might want to check the prices on the menu first. It's not inexpensive here." Several heads turned in their direction, the quiet murmur of conversations dying down as customers began to observe the exchange. Clarence, still calm, met her gaze. "I'm aware of the prices," he said simply, placing a crisp $20 bill on the counter. Bethany smirked, picking up the bill and holding it to the light as though checking for authenticity. "All right then," she said, shrugging, her tone dismissive. "Have a seat. I'll bring it over, eventually." Clarence nodded and walked to an empty table by the window, setting his briefcase down with care. He pulled out his newspaper, his expression serene despite the growing tension in the air. Around him, customers whispered, their glances flitting between Clarence and Bethany. Bethany returned to the counter, shaking her head as she prepared his order with deliberate slowness. To her, this was a small victory, proof that she could decide who was welcome in her space. But what Bethany didn't realize was that the quiet man sitting by the window was far more important than she could have imagined. Clarence waited patiently at his table, sipping water from the glass a passing busboy had placed in front of him. Outside the window, pedestrians hurried past on their morning routines, but inside the cafe, tension lingered. Bethany, now back behind the counter, busied herself with other orders, deliberately delaying Clarence's coffee and croissant. Every so often, Bethany cast a glance toward Clarence, her lips curling into a smirk as she noticed his composed demeanor. To her, his patience only confirmed her assumption. He didn't belong here. Nearly 15 minutes later, Bethany finally approached his table, a tray balanced on one hand. She set down a coffee cup and a plate with a slightly burnt croissant with an audible clatter. Without meeting his gaze, she mumbled, "Here you go." Clarence glanced at the coffee and croissant, but instead of reacting to the poorly presented order, he simply offered a polite, "Thank you." Bethany raised an eyebrow, as if daring him to complain. "Anything else?" she asked, her voice sharper than necessary. Clarence, ever composed, folded his newspaper neatly and looked up. "No, this will do for now." The interaction drew the attention of a nearby couple. The man leaned closer to his companion and whispered, "She's being so rude to him. What's her problem?" His companion glanced nervously at Bethany, but nodded in agreement. Bethany overheard the murmurs, her irritation growing. She turned abruptly and walked back to the counter, shaking her head. Unbelievable, she muttered to a coworker as she passed. People like that always act like they deserve the world. Meanwhile, Clarence calmly sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the room. Despite the cold treatment, he maintained his air of quiet dignity. However, more patrons were starting to take notice of the waitress's unprofessional behavior. The situation escalated further when Clarence raised a hand, signaling Bethany. She rolled her eyes before reluctantly walking over. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I was wondering if you had any butter or jam for the croissant," Clarence said kindly. Bethany let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "We're not a diner," she replied. "What you see is what you get." Clarence's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't respond to her tone. "I understand," he said. The room grew quieter. A young man at the next table frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the interaction. "That's just unnecessary," he muttered to his friend. Bethany turned on her heel, muttering under her breath as she stalked back to the counter. The incident seemed to energize her. She spent the next few minutes loudly complaining to her co-workers, her voice carrying across the cafe. "This is supposed to be an upscale place," she said, just loud enough for Clarence to hear. "We shouldn't have to deal with freeloaders coming in here pretending they belong." Little did Bethany know, her actions were not going unnoticed by everyone, and her assumptions were about to shatter in the most public way possible. The cafe door swung open with a faint chime, unnoticed by most of the patrons. Rachel Johnson stepped inside, her presence commanding yet understated. She was in her mid-30s, her tailored navy blazer, and perfectly matched trousers exuding professionalism. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, and a leather tote hung elegantly over her shoulder. Rachel paused, scanning the room with sharp, perceptive eyes. She had always preferred to observe quietly before stepping into action, a skill that had served her well as the CEO of a thriving cafe chain. Her gaze landed on her father, Clarence Johnson, seated near the counter. He looked composed as ever, his neatly pressed gray cardigan and polished shoes a reflection of the dignity he carried with him. But Rachel's discerning eyes caught the tension in his posture and the slight downturn of his mouth. Something was wrong. Then she saw Bethany. The young waitress stood near the counter, her hands on her hips, speaking to Clarence in a tone that was far from courteous. Rachel's lips tightened. She moved to a seat at the edge of the cafe, her position giving her a clear view of the interaction. She quietly placed her tote on the table and listened. Bethany, oblivious to the new arrival, continued her condescending tirade. "I told you," she said loudly, her voice dripping with disdain. "We don't do special requests for just anyone. If you can't pick something from the menu as it is, then maybe you're in the wrong place." Clarence's voice was calm, though tinged with disappointment. "Young lady, I've been coming to this cafe for years. All I asked for was—" Bethany cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. Yeah, you always come here. I've heard it all before. Rules are rules, sir. I'm just protecting the cafe's reputation." The room grew uncomfortably quiet, but Bethany seemed oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. She turned to another patron nearby, muttering just loud enough to be heard. "Some people think they can get away with anything." From her seat, Rachel felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. Yet she didn't move immediately. Years of leadership had taught her the value of timing. Instead, she watched, waiting for the right moment. She observed the other patrons exchanging uneasy glances and noticed a few murmurs beginning to ripple through the room. Rachel stood, her movements deliberate. She crossed the cafe with a quiet authority that turned heads. Approaching her father, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Dad, is everything all right?" she asked softly. Clarence looked up, relief flickering across his face. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady but weary. "I'm glad you're here." Bethany, however, remained unfazed. She gave Rachel a quick, dismissive glance before focusing back on the register. "If you're here to back him up, don't bother," she said. "I'm just doing my job." Rachel turned to Bethany, her expression neutral. Your job? She asked. And what exactly does your job entail? Bethany, misunderstanding the question, launched into a self-righteous explanation. It means keeping this place professional. We don't bend over backward for anyone who walks in just because they feel entitled. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice remained calm. Do you even know who Clarence Johnson is? Bethany smirked, leaning against the counter. Nope, she replied. Just another complainer. Rachel straightened her posture, her calm demeanor now tinged with quiet authority. The tension in the cafe thickened as Bethany's smugness lingered in the air. Clarence remained seated, his composed demeanor unshaken, though his eyes reflected a quiet hurt that Rachel could not ignore. Excuse me, Rachel began, her tone even but firm. Did I hear you correctly just now? You referred to my father as just another complainer. Bethany, still unaware of the storm brewing, shrugged with a half smirk. Look, lady, I don't mean to be rude, but people like him come in here all the time thinking they deserve special treatment. It's my job to set boundaries. Rachel tilted her head slightly, studying Bethany with the same precision she applied to analyzing business deals. And you believe belittling a loyal customer is part of setting boundaries? Bethany scoffed. I'm protecting the reputation of this cafe. If that means not bending the rules for someone who thinks they're entitled, then yeah, I'm doing my job. The other patrons exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering among themselves. By now, all eyes in the cafe were on Rachel and Bethany. Rachel's voice remained steady, her words deliberate. Interesting. You seem very sure of your authority here. I am, Bethany snapped, her confidence emboldened by what she assumed was a position of power. Why? Who even are you? Rachel reached into her leather tote, pulling out a sleek ID badge bearing the logo of the cafe chain. She held it up for everyone to see, the words, Rachel Johnson, CEO, glinting under the warm cafe lights. I'm Rachel Johnson, she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. I own this cafe, and that man you just disrespected? That's my father. The room froze. Bethany's face drained of color as the weight of Rachel's words hit her. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. The whispers among the customers grew louder, some leaning closer to their companions, others taking out their phones to capture the unfolding scene. Bethany stammered, her confidence crumbling. I didn't know. I didn't realize. Rachel's expression remained calm but unyielding. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You didn't care enough to realize. You assumed you could treat my father, or anyone for that matter, with such blatant disrespect and get away with it. Clarence, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke. Bethany, he began, his voice gentle but firm. Do you really think protecting the cafe's reputation means humiliating people who come here? Bethany looked down, her earlier bravado completely gone. I didn't mean to. Rachel didn't let her finish. This cafe was built on the values of respect, inclusivity, and community, she said. Your actions today reflect none of those values. Not only did you insult a loyal customer, but you also judged him without even knowing who he was. Bethany opened her mouth, but no words came out. She glanced around the room, searching for an escape from the mounting judgment in the eyes of the patrons. Rachel took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. This isn't just about my father. It's about how you treat people in general. You've made it clear that you're quick to judge and even quicker to belittle. That behavior has no place in this cafe, or any workplace for that matter. The murmurs among the customers grew louder, many nodding in agreement. A man at a nearby table whispered, "She got what she deserved," while another added, "About time someone stood up to people like her." Rachel turned to Clarence, her tone softening. "Dad, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. You deserve better." Clarence nodded, his face calm but grateful. "Thank you, Rachel. I knew you'd handle this the right way." The moment was broken by Rachel turning back to Bethany. "You'll apologize to my father and the patrons here for your behavior. Then we'll discuss your future with this company. Bethany's face flushed. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to disrespect you. Clarence gave her a small nod. Apology accepted, but I hope you'll take this as a lesson to treat everyone with dignity. Rachel's gaze remained firm as she addressed the cafe. To everyone here, I want to apologize on behalf of the cafe. This behavior is not who we are, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. The cafe erupted in a mix of applause and murmured approval as Rachel escorted Clarence to a quieter corner. Meanwhile, Bethany stood frozen, the reality of her actions sinking in. The cafe buzzed with murmurs as Rachel returned to the counter, her composed demeanor masking the simmering tension in the room. Bethany stood rigid, her face a mixture of panic and regret. The reality of her actions and their consequences had started to sink in, but Rachel knew that words alone weren't enough. Bethany needed to face accountability. Rachel cleared her throat, her voice firm yet measured. Bethany, she began, what you've done today goes against everything this cafe stands for. You didn't just disrespect a customer, you undermined the values this establishment was built on. Bethany looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't mean to. Rachel held up a hand, silencing her. An apology is a start, she said, but it's not enough. Actions have consequences, and this cafe has a responsibility to its customers and its staff to uphold standards of respect and professionalism. The patrons in the cafe, who had been quietly watching the exchange, nodded in agreement. Rachel turned toward them. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience today. I'm deeply sorry for the incident you witnessed, and I assure you steps are being taken to address it. Rachel then focused back on Bethany. First, you will apologize publicly to my father and to everyone here who had to witness your behavior. Bethany's eyes widened. Publicly? She whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, publicly, Rachel said firmly. Humility is an important step in understanding the impact of your actions. Reluctantly, Bethany stepped forward, her cheeks flushed as the weight of the moment bore down on her. She took a deep breath and faced the room. I want to apologize, she began, her voice shaky, to Mr. Johnson and to everyone here. I let my assumptions and attitude get the better of me, and I acted in a way that was unkind and unprofessional. Clarence, seated nearby, nodded graciously. Thank you for your apology, he said gently. I hope you'll take this experience to heart. Rachel let the room settle before continuing. Bethany, as of this moment, you are suspended from your duties pending an internal review. During your suspension, you will undergo mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. The decision regarding your employment will be made based on what we see from you during this process. Bethany's face fell, but she didn't argue. She nodded slowly, her earlier arrogance replaced by a visible sense of regret. I understand, she mumbled. The cafe erupted in quiet applause, a show of support for Rachel's decisive actions. Some patrons even approached Rachel and Clarence, expressing gratitude for the way the situation had been handled. The fallout from the cafe incident unfolded rapidly, fueled by the age of smartphones and social media. A customer in the cafe had discreetly recorded the confrontation between Rachel and Bethany, capturing the moment Rachel revealed her identity as the CEO and the ensuing public apology. Within hours, the video began circulating online, gaining traction across platforms. The hashtag #CafeCEO started trending as viewers shared their thoughts on the incident. Comments flooded in, ranging from admiration for Rachel's leadership to condemnation of Bethany's behavior. This is how you handle discrimination, with class and accountability, wrote one user. Another commented, we need more leaders like Rachel Johnson who stand up for what's right. By the next morning, major news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines such as Cafe CEO takes stand against racism and Waitress learns the hard way, don't judge a book by its cover, dominated social media feeds. Rachel's calm but firm handling of the situation was praised widely, though the coverage wasn't without controversy. While many lauded Rachel's swift action, some questioned whether the incident highlighted deeper issues within the cafe chain itself. Critics pointed out that systemic bias in customer service is not uncommon, and wondered if the company had failed to address such problems proactively. Rachel knew she couldn't stay silent. She scheduled a press conference to address the growing attention and clarify the company's position. Standing at the podium, flanked by Clarence and key staff members, she spoke with a calm authority. As the CEO of this cafe chain, I take full responsibility for ensuring that every customer, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect, Rachel began. What happened yesterday is unacceptable and does not reflect the values we uphold. Let me be clear, this was not just an isolated incident, but a symptom of a larger issue that we are committed to addressing. She went on to outline the steps the company would take moving forward. Mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, anonymous reporting systems for customers and employees, and a renewed focus on inclusivity as a core value. Her words were sincere, but her tone was firm, leaving no room for excuses. The reporters pressed her with questions. "Do you think the waitress should have been fired immediately?" one asked. Rachel shook her head. "Accountability doesn't mean immediate dismissal," she replied. "It means giving people the chance to recognize their mistakes and grow. That's what we're doing here, not just with one employee, but across the company." Meanwhile, Bethany became the center of public scrutiny. Social media users dug up old posts and comments, amplifying the backlash. Some even called for a boycott of the cafe chain. Rachel was quick to discourage such behavior, issuing a statement urging people to focus on positive change rather than vilification. Despite the challenges, the cafe chain saw an unexpected rise in customer traffic. Many patrons visited specifically to support Rachel's leadership, expressing their appreciation for her proactive approach. Clarence, too, found himself receiving attention, with strangers offering words of encouragement and gratitude for his grace during the ordeal. Bethany sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through her phone, her face pale as she read the relentless wave of comments on social media. The video of her mistreating Clarence Johnson had gone viral, and her name was now synonymous with everything wrong in customer service. Words like racist and entitled filled the comment section, and she couldn't look away from the backlash. Suspended from her job, Bethany felt the weight of her actions for the first time. She had tried to justify herself in her mind. She was just doing her job, right? But the harsh truth of the video, combined with Rachel's calm yet powerful words, shattered that illusion. As part of her suspension, Bethany was required to attend mandatory sensitivity and diversity training sessions organized by the cafe chain. She arrived at the first session reluctantly, her defenses high, but it didn't take long for the experience to challenge her perspective. The trainer, a charismatic woman named Angela, shared stories from her own life, recounting the subtle and overt racism she had faced working in hospitality. Angela's words were raw and impactful, forcing Bethany to see parallels in her own behavior. "Bias isn't always loud," Angela said. "Sometimes it's in the assumptions we make, the judgments we pass without even realizing it. That's where the real harm begins." Bethany shifted uncomfortably in her chair, memories of her treatment of Clarence playing in her mind. For the first time, she wondered how many other customers she had judged unfairly. How many people had she dismissed without considering their dignity or worth? The training sessions weren't easy. The material forced Bethany to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Angela showed footage of similar incidents caught on camera, paired with interviews of the victims describing how those moments impacted them. Each story felt like a mirror reflecting Bethany's own behavior. But it wasn't just the training that began to change her. Clarence's role in her journey became pivotal. One afternoon, he visited the cafe where Bethany had been required to return for supervised shifts as part of her rehabilitation. She avoided eye contact at first, embarrassed and unsure of what to say. But Clarence, true to his nature, broke the ice. "I see you're back," Clarence said kindly, his voice free of malice. Bethany nodded, staring at the counter. I'm sorry," she mumbled. Clarence sat across from her, his expression gentle. "You know, Bethany, We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after them. The question isn't if you're sorry, it's whether you'll learn. His words lingered with her long after their conversation ended. Clarence's grace was disarming, and it gave Bethany a new sense of responsibility. He didn't have to forgive her, yet he was giving her a chance to grow. During her return shifts, Bethany began noticing things she hadn't before. She saw how her colleagues interacted with customers, the small gestures that created a welcoming atmosphere. She realized that customer service wasn't just about efficiency, it was about empathy. One day, as she served a group of elderly patrons, she caught herself hesitating before making an assumption about one of them. Instead of reacting on instinct, she asked, "How can I assist you today?" The interaction went smoothly, and for the first time in weeks, Bethany felt a flicker of pride in her work. Clarence continued to visit the cafe occasionally, often sitting with Rachel. Each time, he greeted Bethany warmly, his demeanor reminding her that she still had a chance to make things right. One afternoon, he handed her a handwritten letter. "I wanted to share some thoughts," he said, his kind eyes meeting hers. "Take your time reading it." The letter spoke of Clarence's experiences with discrimination, the hurt it caused, and his hope for a better world. But it also spoke of forgiveness and the power of growth. Bethany read it that night, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just a letter, it was a lifeline. Clarence had chosen grace over bitterness, and Bethany vowed not to squander the opportunity he had given her. The cafe had been bustling with activity since Rachel Johnson announced a series of changes to improve its culture. Word had spread about her bold handling of the incident with Bethany, and customers were eager to support the establishment that now stood as a symbol of accountability and inclusivity. The first change Rachel implemented was mandatory sensitivity training for all employees. Each session was led by professional trainers who used real-world scenarios to emphasize the importance of empathy and respect in customer interactions. The staff initially approached the training with mixed emotions. Some saw it as a necessary step, while others grumbled about extra work. However, as the sessions progressed, attitudes began to shift. Employees shared personal experiences, deepening their understanding of the diverse clientele they served. Rachel also introduced an anonymous reporting system, allowing employees and customers to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. This system encouraged transparency and gave the cafe a way to address issues before they escalated. Rachel made it clear in staff meetings, respect isn't negotiable. If we're going to build trust, we must hold ourselves to the highest standards. Meanwhile, the cafe's reputation soared. Stories about the cafe's transformation circulated online, attracting both new customers and old patrons who appreciated the changes. A regular customer, an older woman named Mrs. Carter, remarked to a barista, "I've always loved the coffee here, but now I feel like this place truly cares about people." One noticeable shift was in the diversity of the clientele. Families, students, and professionals of all backgrounds filled the tables, creating an atmosphere of inclusivity that Rachel had envisioned. The cafe's social media page became a hub for positive feedback, with comments praising its commitment to creating a welcoming space. For Rachel, the transformation was personal as much as it was professional. Watching her father, Clarence, smile and chat with staff during his visits reminded her of why she had taken on this mission. One day, as she sat with Clarence over coffee, she asked, "Do you think we're making a difference, Dad?" Clarence nodded, his eyes twinkling. "You've already made a difference. It's in the small things, how people feel when they walk through those doors. That matters." The cafe also became a place of second chances. Rachel partnered with local organizations to provide job opportunities for people facing barriers to employment, including those from marginalized communities. She hired several new staff members, all of whom underwent the same rigorous training as the rest of the team. Among them was Marcus, a young man who had struggled to find work after aging out of the foster system. He quickly became a favorite among customers for his warm demeanor and willingness to go the extra mile. Rachel's efforts extended beyond the cafe walls. She launched an initiative to support other local businesses in adopting similar reforms. Hosting workshops and offering resources, Rachel became a prominent voice for inclusivity in the service industry. Media outlets frequently highlighted her work, and she used the platform to amplify stories of resilience and growth. Even Bethany's return to the cafe reflected the new culture. After completing her training, she rejoined the staff with a more subdued demeanor. Though she still faced skepticism from some colleagues and customers, Rachel gave her a chance to prove she had changed. Slowly, Bethany began to rebuild trust by focusing on her work and treating every customer with respect. One day, she even volunteered to help train new hires, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. The changes weren't without challenges. Some longtime staff members resisted, struggling to adjust to the new expectations. Rachel addressed these concerns directly, holding one-on-one meetings to understand their reservations. While some chose to leave, others embraced the new direction, inspired by Rachel's dedication. By the end of the first year, the cafe had not only recovered from the incident, but thrived because of it. Its revenue increased, and customer satisfaction surveys showed a significant improvement. More importantly, the cafe had become a place where people felt seen, heard, and valued, a testament to Rachel's leadership and her father's wisdom. Sitting by the window in the newly revitalized cafe, Clarence Johnson savored his coffee, watching the bustling crowd. The once familiar faces of staff had grown into a diverse and welcoming team, reflective of the transformation his daughter had championed. For Clarence, this was more than just a cafe. It was now a beacon of hope and progress. Rachel joined him at the table, her expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "It's been quite a year, hasn't it?" she said, stirring her tea. Clarence chuckled, his deep voice warm. "It has. But you've done something remarkable here, Rachel. You've turned this place into more than just a business. It's a community." As they sipped their drinks, Clarence shared reflections on his life and the struggles he had faced as a black man, in a world that often judged him by his skin color before his character. He recounted stories from his youth, moments of quiet resilience, and lessons in perseverance. "Change doesn't come easily," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I've spent decades watching the world evolve, sometimes painfully slowly. What you've done here is a step in the right direction, but the work doesn't stop. You'll face resistance, but you've got to stay the course." Rachel leaned in, her admiration for her father clear. "You know, Dad, you've always been my inspiration. The way you handle everything with such grace. I wouldn't be here without you." Clarence smiled. "And I wouldn't be here if I let bitterness take over. Grace is a choice, Rachel. It's not about letting people off the hook. It's about teaching them to see the world differently." One of the cafe's waitstaff approached their table, holding an envelope. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "this is from Bethany. She asked me to give it to you." Clarence opened the letter carefully. It was a handwritten apology from Bethany, expressing regret for her actions and gratitude for the opportunity to grow. "You taught me a lesson I didn't know I needed," she wrote. "Thank you for your patience and for not giving up on me." Clarence nodded as he read, folding the letter and placing it in his jacket pocket. "It's a start," he said simply. "People can change, Rachel. Sometimes it just takes a moment like this to open their eyes." Rachel glanced around the cafe, watching the customers and staff interacting. It was a scene she once might have taken for granted, but now held a deeper significance. "You've taught me something too, Dad," Rachel said, "that leading with empathy is the most powerful thing we can do." Months later, the cafe had transformed into a symbol of inclusivity and progress. The once ordinary establishment now stood out in the community, its vibrant atmosphere drawing customers from all walks of life. The walls, once plain, now showcased artwork from local underrepresented artists, reflecting the cafe's commitment to diversity. Rachel Johnson sat in her office, reviewing reports. The cafe's profits had increased significantly, but what mattered more to her was the feedback pouring in from customers. Comments like, "This place feels like home," and "Thank you for creating a space where everyone is welcome," filled her inbox. For Rachel, These words were worth more than any financial gain. The cafe had also inspired broader changes across the company. Rachel had implemented mandatory diversity training for all employees in the chain, introduced anonymous reporting systems to ensure accountability, and partnered with community organizations to recruit staff from diverse backgrounds. These initiatives were met with initial resistance, but as the results became evident, the grumbling faded. It's not just about policies, Rachel often reminded her team. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued. Clarence Johnson, now a regular fixture at the cafe, watched these changes with quiet pride. His presence had become a reminder of the incident that sparked it all, but also of the resilience and grace that led to transformation. Customers often stopped to chat with him, thanking him for being a part of something so impactful. One afternoon, Bethany entered the cafe. Nervous but determined, she approached Clarence, who was reading near the window. "Mr. Johnson," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." Clarence smiled warmly. "It's never too late to grow, Bethany. Keep moving forward." Later that day, Rachel joined Clarence at his table, holding a stack of papers. "These are drafts for the new initiative," she said, spreading them out. She had launched a program called Bridges of Understanding, which aimed to promote empathy and respect in customer service industries. The initiative included scholarships for marginalized groups and workshops on cultural sensitivity. "This is going to make a real difference," Rachel said. "It's not just about fixing what's broken, it's about building something better." As the evening sun bathed the cafe in golden light, Rachel and Clarence stepped outside. The sign above the entrance gleamed with the cafe's motto, "Where everyone belongs." It was more than just words. It was a commitment. "You've done something incredible here, Rachel," Clarence said, his voice full of pride. "This isn't just a cafe anymore. It's a legacy." Rachel smiled, her eyes reflecting determination. "It's our legacy, Dad, and this is just the beginning." The story ended not with a resolution, but with a promise, a reminder that change is ongoing, and standing up to prejudice creates ripples of progress. Every small act of kindness and accountability builds a legacy that inspires others to embrace empathy and fairness